The PK van der Baal story, I can't remember when that was. It was about 1970, it was 76. It was about March 1976 when PK went from Minister of Information to Minister of Defense. And I'd just come back from Mount Darwin. I'd done my 2 weeks tour there, or 3 weeks, I can't remember. And I'd landed back in New Zealand at 7 Squadron. And I'd been back a day. I was expecting to stay for about 10 days of R&R before going back to the bush. And the next day, from getting back, I was called by George Wrigley, I think, to come back. There was an air task, nobody else could do it. I had to go and do it, and it was taking the new Minister of Defense around the northeast so he could familiarize himself with what was going on there. So I was quite disappointed because I wanted my R&R, but I didn't know what was coming, and I wouldn't have swapped it for the world once I did the trip. So it was an air task where I was tasked to take PK from New Zealand to Mount Darwin for one night, Mount Darwin to Marymount for one night, Marymount to Fungi, spelled with a P, in the Marymount district for a night, and then back on the Friday. So we were taking off on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and come back on the Friday. So I went to the squadron in the morning to prepare the aeroplane. My tech was a guy called Steve Stead. So he and I were partnered together to take PK around. When we were there, his car arrived with a flag, the Honourable PK van der Baal, Minister of Defence. And he rocked up at the squadron, and he had a set of very newly tailored camouflage kit on. He was distinct, and there was no insignia on his shoulder. There was no rank. But he was wearing an old cummerbund from his Second World War exploits with the 6th Hussars. And it was bright yellow with the 2 red stripes along the middle. So, I mean, he looked like a cummerbund walking in camouflage. And he had his elephant gun with him, a big gun. He insisted on taking it. And he was brought over to the aeroplane, and Steve and myself had already put our stuff into the airplane. The back seat of the Alouette 2 was where we kept our stretchers, pillow, and a little toilet bag with a toothbrush and 2 pairs of pants, underpants. So we took up no space at all. And the car arrived with PK. My boss was Eddie Wilkinson. He brought PK across and introduced us. Now, my dad was an MP by then, backbencher, very right-wing, who believed democracy was completely the wrong thing for the whole of Africa. And PK and him saw eye to eye about this. My dad always said, look, there's been tribal systems working in Africa for somewhere between 5 and 50,000 years, and then the white man comes along with the vote, and it just spoils everything. That's how he felt. And my dad had a lot of respect for the chiefs and their system. I just add that. But PK knew my dad, and they saw eye to eye, and when he heard that I was Peter Simmonds, he put 2 and 2 together, and I was Peter from then onwards, Peter. And they unpacked his car, and he had a bedroll that was not much smaller than a 44-gallon drum. So he had a big mattress and all the kit, and he had 2 bags, and the one bag was his clothes, and the other bag was heavy, and it was full of bottles. And when we took it out to put it in the back of the aeroplane, he said, "Be careful of that." So we were very careful. And and the way you told yourself in a helicopter if you were over the maximum weight, because I was a bit worried. We had fuel to get all the way to Mount Darwin. And there was a little computer ring on the collective pitch in the helicopter, and you just set the air pressure and the temperature on it, and then it would tell you how much power you could pull for maximum power. and that was your maximum all-up weight. So if you're on the ground and you pulled to your maximum and the airplane didn't leave the ground, then you were too heavy, and you'd have to do something about it. And if it got airborne, then you were okay. And we staggered into the air, and we were close to the maximum. And PK was in the back seat directly behind me, the pilot. Sitting next to him was Steve Stead, and off we went with this bedroll and stuff. And we crossed the fence at New Serum, barely, and crossed the airfield and headed. Once you get moving in a helicopter, you get translational lift and you get a whole lot of extra power. So we were able to climb, and I'd been instructed to go high-ish level, which was 1,000 feet, to Bandura, and then to come down to the trees and go low level from Bandura to Mount Darwin. And so I climbed up over, 2nd Street Extension and Salisbury Sports Club. And as we went past, I'd already been told that I had to bring PK back to land at New Serum on Friday, where he would be met by the commander of New Serum, the group captain, and welcomed, and then he would get in his car and go home. But as we went past Salisbury Sports Club, well, PK pointed down at the Aloe Garden there. There was a botanical garden just north of the golf course at the Salisbury Sports Club. And Salisbury and 2nd Street Extension went past there. And he said he wanted to be landed there on Friday. And I said, yeah, but I'm supposed to take you back to New Serum. He said, no, it's all been organized, Peter. People are going to be there to meet me. So it's got to be the botanical garden. I thought, well, he outranks everybody in the military, so I'll do what he wants. And forgot about it. We got to Bandura, went over to Dompashawa, you could see Mazoe, and we went past Bandura, and I was very used to flying at treetop level. For me, it was normal. I was told not to frighten the new Minister of Defence, but I could see his face when we got to tree level that he wasn't all that pleased about. He was lifting his legs as we went past trees. And so I said, don't worry, boss, it's fine. This is the level we fly at so that nobody can shoot at us. He said, okay. And halfway to Mount Darwin, I went across to the Darwin frequency. The way our call signs worked was Alpha 7 for 7 Squadron was the squadron commander. Bravo 7 was the first flight commander. Charlie 7 was the next flight commander, and all the way down. So I must have been about Hotel 7 at that stage. I was quite junior. And my call sign was somewhere around Hotel 7. So I called up Darwin and I said, Hotel 7 here, Darwin, I've got your VIP on board. We'll be landing in 15 minutes. And they answered, the ops from there, and said, okay, land on the main road at such and such a place where there'll be a welcoming party for the VIP. I said, fine. And then the chatter on the radio, we could hear that obviously there was a contact taking place. And I knew that if I went across to channel 2, 1226 as it was, I would hear what was going on. So I flicked across and our PK perked up. He was real keen now. And I said, yeah, there's a contact going on. He said, oh, you must take me there. And he wanted me to take him to the contact and drop him in the contact. And on high ground, Peter, I like to attack downhill. And no radio, I was just going to drop him with his elephant gun. So I knew that couldn't happen. I think he probably knew that couldn't possibly happen. Steve Stead was just sitting in the back shaking his head. And but so I thought, okay, well, I'll make a play by talking to Mount Darwin. I knew that Peter Rich was in charge by then. The King had left the RLI. And Peter Rich was in the ops room, so he was obviously Sunray Darwin ops. And so I called up and I said, Darwin, Hotel 7 here. The VIP wants to go over the top of the contact at high level, way above the K-car, and take in the contact at sea. And Peter Rich came on the radio and he said, Sunray here. Simo, you get the Minister of Defence here to my ops room, where I'll get him as close as he needs to get on my map to the contact. So I looked at PK. He looked very disappointed, but he understood. So we landed in Darwin, and he was taken away to the ops room. And he went off to pore over maps and talk to the guys in charge there, Peter Rich mostly, and Tol Janneke was in charge of the Air Force there, so he would have been involved in jock meetings and stuff like that. So I didn't see PK again for a few hours. So the next time I saw him was at dinner in the mess. And he brought out 2 bottles of wine. I think it was French wine or South African wine, and a bottle of whiskey. He put it down on the table and invited everybody to partake. So I guess there were about 12 of us there that had a glass of wine each. And of course, we're gaining great favor for PK because of what he'd done. He didn't drink much himself, but just wanted everybody else to drink on him. So while we were there, there'd been a contact in Jabara Hills about 3 weeks before. And it was a real bad contact in which we had a lot of wounded guys. And the wounded had been taken to Karanda mission. And the renowned American surgeon in Karanda mission had patched our guys up, one commando, RLI guys, and saved a few lives. And that had all happened a few weeks before. So at the dinner, they decided that I would take PK to Karanda mission the next day so he could go and thank the surgeon in person. And that's because I was the pilot. They said, you take him to Karanda and then on to Marymount. So the next day we took off and we went to Karanda mission. When I landed at Karanda, the runway was east-west, as most runways were. And we landed at the eastern end, which was up against all the buildings at Karanda. There was a big church there, and the mission had a huge theater surgery. And when I landed, I noticed there was another airplane on the ground there, a Cessna. And obviously somebody from Joburg had chartered the Cessna to get to Karanda mission for whatever reason. And the pilot was a South African pilot, charter pilot. And he was standing there with the cowls of his engine open with a tin of oil in his hand, and he was servicing his engine. And he wandered over to us when we landed. And when I stopped the blades, he came up and spoke to us and introduced himself. And so I introduced PK to him. So this is the new Minister of Defense of Rhodesia. And he was one of those really polite Afrikaans-speaking guys. So he, the name Van der Bijl, he expected him to speak Afrikaans. So he shook hands and lifted his cap and shook hands on kennis to PK Van der Bijl and called PK Your Highness. And I thought, Your Highness is for princes, but who am I to put him right? So I left it for PK to put him right. And we told him we wanted to find the surgeon and wanted to thank him. And it was, this way, Your Highness, that way, Your Highness, we come through this door, Your Highness. And I looked at PK and I noticed his nose had gone up a little higher, and he wasn't going to put this guy straight at all. So he stayed as Your Highness. And the surgeon was actually in the theatre, and he was working on somebody's leg in there. And I remember that somebody went in, the door to the surgeon was swing doors with gauze to stop the flies from going in there. And somebody went in and called the surgeon out, and he dropped everything. He used his elbow to open the door, came out, and he had his hands in the air with blood and gore. And he couldn't shake hands or anything, but PK made his little speech of thank you very much. And the guy was very nice. And he took the thanks, and thanks for looking after our guys, saving their lives. It's worth a lot to us. And your help really was useful to us. Thank you. And off we went. And we got back in the helicopter, took off now with a little bit more pomp, and flew towards Marymount mission. And on the way to Marymount, we flew over 2 women out in the middle of nowhere with 2 big suitcases on their heads. And they were hauling these suitcases. There were no villages anywhere near. It was just this path. And so we flew over them, and PK saw them. And I said, I wonder what they're carrying. And he said, we better check. We better stop and check. So I thought, I'm going to put him on the ground in the middle of the bush. But he was insistent. Peter, there could be weapons of war. The previous Minister of Defence hadn't been near us. He was a school teacher, Harman. Most ministers of defence, they had their boss of the army, boss of the air force to take care of the civil servant side of stuff. But PK was obviously going to be hands-on, and he wanted to be involved. And he insisted I put him on the ground. So I couldn't land right next to these women. So I stopped about 50 meters away in an LZ, and I said to Steve, take your gun and go with him, look after him. So the two of them got out of the airplane and went rocketing off into the bush. I couldn't see the two ladies where I dropped them. So I got airborne, and by the time I was airborne, the two women were standing with their hands up and the suitcases on the ground, open. And PK was using the barrel of his gun to hoik clothes, dresses, and things. And there was obviously nothing in the suitcases except these clothes. So it was a few minutes, and then they realized there was nothing there. So they said to the ladies, okay, off you go. And they came back to the LZ. I picked him up. But PK was chuffed. He was full of himself. He'd been doing something useful now. Yeah. Now, when we landed in Marymount Mission, Marymount was a different kettle of fish to Karanda. Karanda was, they didn't really take sides. Marymount, the father in charge there was Father Stefan. In my story, when I wrote it for you, I called him Ignatius to cover it for his family or whatever, but I don't think it matters now. He was Father Stefan for short, and he was very much in favor of the terrorist cause, and he didn't like us at all, being anywhere near his mission. And I'd been to Marymount before that and stayed there briefly, and the big attraction at Marymount Mission was a wonderful swimming pool. It was a 25-meter swimming pool, huge thing, paid for by America. And I tried to swim there, and I had to ask Father Stefan for permission, and he was very reluctant. There were so many rules attached to whether I could swim there or not. I had to shower first and wash my feet, and I did manage to get a swim there, but it was difficult. So anyway, I landed at Marymount. The SAS were there and the RAR were there. Robbie Robinson was there, and they were operating across the border, and his headquarters was Marymount. They'd lost Corporal Story the day before, and I thought this is going to be different, and PK is going to have to work quite hard to make himself popular here. Anyway, we landed. We went to the SAS first. Brian Robbie was really nice. He's showing him exactly what they were doing across the border in the ops room and chatting away. And whilst he was there, we were all in shorts, and it was hot as anything. Marymount was quite low altitude, so it was hot. And Brian Robbie said to him, "Sir, don't you want some shorts? The longs are just going to make you hot." He said, "Yeah, thank you. He'd like some shorts." So he got his quartermaster, go and get some shorts for the minister. And he went into the tent to change into the shorts, and they were really small and tight. They were far too short. So he came out wearing them, these long spindly legs, and it was obvious that he needed a size or two bigger. So Brian said to him, "Oh, we need a bigger pair of pants for you, boss. Quartermaster, get him, what are you, a size 36 or something?" Yeah. So they went and got him a size 36, but PK's remark was, "Thank you, Brian. I think my cock sticks out of these ones too much." So he got a pair of trousers to fit, and he then wandered over to where the RAR were. And I can't remember who the major in charge of the RAR was, but he spent a couple of hours with them, And he arranged to spend the night on ambush with the RAR that night. You're going to stay up the whole night and go into ambush. So he was really being hands-on. And so he came back to the SAS for dinner, brought out 3 bottles again, a bottle of whiskey and 2 bottles of wine, put them in this tent with a tilly lamp, because we were under tents and no electricity. He charmed everybody. And then at about 9 o'clock, he got up and with his gun and went off to the RAR, and they went out into the bush to ambush a likely path or road. And I was in a tent, and I woke up that night and I could hear the pitter-patter of rain. So I realized he was sitting out there with his hat on and rain all around him. And the rain had gone the next morning at about 6:30. He came wandering out the bush, soot all over his legs because he'd been walking through a burnt field. And he had an axe, a demo, in one hand and his gun in the other hand. And I said, you've found an axe, sir? And he said, a very nice specimen, a beautiful specimen. I thought I'd keep it. Somebody's thrown it away. So he kept his demo. So if there's a demo in Valerian's house, he knows where it comes from. So he went to sleep, and everyone was told to keep quiet around his tent for some hours. And around about lunchtime, he woke up, and we were now due to go to Marymount. And he was just saying goodbye to everybody, and there was a bit of a team of SAS guys around him. And he gave a little speech saying, okay, well, we're on our way. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, all of you, for your help. I'm on my way to Salisbury tomorrow. If there's anything I can do for you, take some letters and post them for you, anything like that, please let me know if I can help. And the one guy, I can't remember who it was, but Brian Robbie will remember who it was, said, yeah, there is one thing that you could mention. He said, we've been having trouble using the swimming pool that belongs to Father Stefan. And he's basically a collaborator of the terrorists, doesn't like us. And there's so many rules that it's almost impossible to get wet when you go swimming. And so can you perhaps do something for us? And our PK understood exactly what was going on. He picked up on it immediately. Brian Robbie had been to Father Stefan, I think, and negotiated a time from 5 until 5:30, when soldiers could use the swimming pool. And when PK heard that, he said, okay, I've got it. He said, listen, Sergeant, go to Father Stefan and give him my compliments as the Minister of Defence, and tell him he can use the swimming pool from 5 until 5:30. And if he doesn't like the new rules, we'll deport the fellow. So I don't know if that's exactly what happened, but I do know that every soldier heard about that story and thought highly of PK within 100 miles of there. So we took off and we went to Fungi. Now, when I was a kid, I can remember Fungi airfield being bulldozed and built, because my dad was the district commissioner there. And Fungi airfield was only used on this one occasion for a Fireforce. Motoko hadn't opened yet at that stage as a forward airfield. And Bruce Snellgar was there. I don't remember which commando Bruce was. Was that the support commando, Bruce Snellgar? I don't remember. But it was Bruce who was there. And the distinctive thing about that airfield was just off to one side of it was a really big 100-meter by 100-meter, mostly flat granite rock. And they built the camp on it because at night it was quite cold, and the sun would beat down on that rock and it would retain the heat. So when you went to sleep at night on a stretcher on that rock, it was warm. Anyway, we landed there. And by then I'd elevated PK to VVIP. So when I called up Fungi, I said, okay, this is Hotel 7 or Golf 7. This is the flight bringing in the VVIP. And Joe Sislow was one of the pilots there, Tony Jordan was one of the techs there, and they organized, because they didn't know it was PK that was coming. Only Bruce Snellgard was PK, and they thought I was showing off. They thought I was just going there on a flight, and that I didn't have any VIP on board. And I told them I was going to fly past the camp at a couple of 100 feet so that PK could see the whole lie of the land, and then we'd go and land. And they organized a brown eye. So there were 8 of them, all lined up as we flew past. And as we flew past, I saw them, and PK saw them at the same time, and he pressed the intercom button. He said, "Peter, are these your friends?" So anyway, we landed, and Bruce took care of him. And it was the normal thing. He looked at maps and did all the things and found out what was going on in that area and showed a lot of interest. And then I didn't see him again until that evening, when out came the bottles. We were under the stars, the trestle table laid out, and the wine bottles and the remaining whiskey bottle came out. And that night, there was a blue job comsen near where we were sitting on the rock, and it was loud. And every evening, there was a woman Air Force person who was on the women's voices. Once the women started coming into uniform, were used on the radios, and this woman was going flat out for about 2.5 hours with opsims and jetsims and the amount of personnel at each place out in the bush. It had to be done every night to update headquarters with exactly where the fuel drums were and all this. And it went on and on and on. We could hardly hear ourselves talking. And Bruce Snellgard didn't want to say, "For God's sake, shut up," because it was a blue job radio that was blaring. And nobody amongst the blue jobs thought to go and say, "Turn it down." And it was really irritating. And eventually Bruce said, "For God's sake, turn that thing down. Can you imagine being married to that?" And Tony Jordan said, "That is my wife, sir." I have to listen to it every night. He was very specific. He wanted me to land at the landing spot that I described, the Ella Garden, at exactly 5 o'clock. It had to be 5 o'clock. I had to work out my timing. The night before, I got a message, a telegram thing from that comsen, the noisy comsen. It said, confirm you must land in front of the headquarters building around about 5 o'clock on Friday, where the minister will be met. And I didn't answer it. I knew I wasn't going to go there. And I knew where I was going to land. So we took off with me timing it so that we landed at exactly 5 o'clock. And that's when it became clear to me as to why this was planned. It's all been organized, as he said. Because there was a special piece of grass there that was just perfect for an Alouette to land. And it was 30 meters away from the 2nd Street main road, 2nd Street extension. 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, jam-packed with traffic. And when we landed there, of course, the traffic just stopped. So there were hundreds of motor cars. Everybody wanted to see what was going on with this loud helicopter, camouflaged. And PK got out. He had his 2 house guys dressed in white, standing there waiting. Those were the people who had been arranged with to meet us. And one took his bedroll on his head and started walking back to the house, which was on the other side of 2nd Street. And the other one took the 2 bags. And PK had a demo in one hand, lots of soot on his legs, and his big gun in the other hand, and walked over 2nd Street extension, weaving through the motor cars, waving at everybody. And I thought, yeah, you're getting lots of votes now. And obviously it had been announced in the newspaper, the Herald, a few days before, that he'd taken over as the Minister of Defence. So there he was now being seen, caught out in uniform. Yeah. So it was a wonderful flight. He was the most colourful character imaginable. And the roughest soldiers who were just taken in. Yeah. And the accent was he used to call it the bush. And a dreadful cost of things these days.